Getting to our speaker of the day, I've known this gentleman a long time, and I think he probably admits that he knows me too. But Chris is a native of Lexington and a graduate of the University of Kentucky College of Agriculture. He founded McCoy Architects in 1997, and interestingly enough, his first project was designing a mosque. His firm designs a variety of commercial and non-commercial buildings, but he's mostly known for his work on religious structures, which brings him to us today. Chris has worked on church projects as well and is currently involved in designing mosques and Islamic schools across the Midwest US, and that includes Kentucky, Ohio, Tennessee, Indiana, and Minnesota. Somehow he found time to be with us today, but he's probably got another project this afternoon. Chris has spoken about mosque designs and conferences and symposiums across America. So please welcome Chris McCoy to Christian-Muslim Dialogue. I think we're going to have a very interesting time today with him. So Chris, turn it over to you. It's all yours.
All right, again, my name is Chris McCoy. I'm from Lexington. I'm an architect. Ron, I went to the College of Architecture, not agriculture, but that's okay. You were close. Just had to, I've known Ron a long time, so I have to give him grief when I can. Right now, Zoom is taking over my laptop. There we go. Ron's already given you some of this, but I am a native from Lexington. In fact, I grew up pretty close to here, out on this end of town. My mother was a choir director in Arlington Christian Church and a piano teacher, and my father ran a local dump truck company. So I'm a local for sure. I attended Bryan Station High School nearby and the College of Architecture here at UK. I am married. My wife's name is Asia Mahudin McCoy now. She's also an architect. She's here in attendance today. But before we got married, I accepted Islam at Masjid Bilal in 1993. And that's back when Masjid Bilal was on Georgetown Street before we moved to the building off to our side here in this building where we're at now. We have two boys, both in college, ages 17 and 22. For several years, 5 years, I was a board member here at Masjid Bilal. It's been a few years since then. So, but as Ron mentioned, I'm an architect. Actually, he's mentioned some of this. I became an architect in 1993, and I had the pleasure of working for other architects that did a lot of church work. And then when I started my own practice, I had the opportunity to design a mosque. So that was a way to take what I had learned, yet apply it to my own faith and my own experiences. And so it was great to do. I've always kind of had a mosque project around. Of course, I design a lot of other projects too. But as time has gone on, I've designed more and more mosques and Islamic schools and things like that. Once you get known for something, you have that opportunity again. So again, as I mentioned, here's some photographs of some of the other projects that we've done. Some of the ones that more people know of is the Chevy Chase Animal Clinic. I've done a Mellow Mushroom restaurant. Those are things in town. Done some houses. We've done a lot of work for Parks and Recreation. I'm doing a few projects there, and I've done some historic work for a house at Shagertown and the recreation of a historic home here in Lexington, the McMeekin House. So I have done other things, even though all I'm going to really show you today is mosques, because that's kind of what I've known for. One question I get a lot is, Chris, how many mosques have you designed? And for me, it's not so easy to just answer that question. How many have I designed? Oh, I've designed a lot. How many have been built? That's a different number. They're not always just straight up design the project. Some are additions, some are renovations, some are early sketches that become a project. Some are early sketches so that the community can do fundraising for it, and then the project evolves and becomes something else. So I decided to go down the list, and I grabbed most of the Islamic institutions that I've worked for. It's not all by any means, but it's most of the ones that people might recognize. And then I've highlighted in yellow and bold the actual mosques that have been built. So there's a list. And right off the bat, the first few were successful because there were only a few of them. I think there were a lot of ones that I worked for that I didn't include in this list, but if you've ever been to Prestonsburg, which is uh, in the Islamic Center of Eastern Kentucky, Somerset, West Virginia, I've gotten around. I've become an architect in other states, mostly because of my mosque work. So while I've done a lot of projects in central Kentucky of wider variety, once I get out of the state, that's kind of why I'm there. So that's what most of those projects are. And we can come back to this list, including several that I'm working for right now, which I don't have a picture of, but like the local Islamic school, Lexington Universal Academy, is under construction. There's a project in Indiana that I will show you that's starting construction. And then we have a big project in Toledo that is under construction for their Islamic school. I've also spoken, as Ron mentioned, at several different symposiums or conferences. Probably most notable is 3 separate times I've spoken at the Islamic Society of North America, which is a very large, it is really the large Muslim conference, at least for Muslim communities in the United States or in North America, includes Canada. Usually, and it's about mosque design. Most of the time it's been a panel discussion, but once I had my own presentation there. I'm not much of a speaker. I'm an architect. This is what I do. So I'm not really on the lecture circuit or anything like that. One exciting presentation I got to do was actually as part of the Ramadan Festival in Amsterdam. I got to travel all the way to Amsterdam, and the whole conference was going on in Dutch. And I'm sitting there freaking out because I do not speak Dutch. And they're like, okay, so our speaker doesn't speak English, or doesn't speak Dutch, so we're just going to switch over to English. Okay, and go. And then I was like, oh, so. And then right after that, I got on an airplane, flew back to Dayton, Ohio. I actually had my wife there just in case I didn't make it, and attended a mosque zoning hearing. So from Amsterdam to Dayton, Ohio in one shot. Kind of freaked them out a little bit. But anyway, I've had the pleasure of speaking about mosque design a little bit. So some of the first mosques that I've designed, again, I mentioned that one in Eastern Kentucky, that's in the top left corner of your screen. And then I did Somerset in Somerset, Kentucky, which even though the one in the lower right corner, they look different, they're actually very similar in size, scope, cost, and everything. So that's where I started. And then I also had the opportunity to do the one in Huntington, West Virginia. And it's maybe not the most attractive thing I've ever done, but it was a very challenging site, very, very small site. So we kind of had to work that one in. But I've also done things like master plans, long-term development plans, and those sort of things for the Islamic School of Louisville. That is their master plan in the lower left corner. I did not actually design the buildings. They've only built phase 1 and 2, but we did their long-term development plans. So one that a lot of people has seen is the Islamic Center of Elizabethtown. Can you all see the titles across the top? That banner is across the top. Let's see if, I don't know that I can make that go away. Anyway, I'll just tell you what's at the top. The Islamic Center of Elizabethtown is about a 400-person facility. There was a master plan for a future school and a gym and those sort of things. That's what the plan at the bottom is. They have not built that yet. And actually, if you look really close in the photo on the bottom, you can see my wife and my children playing around inside the mosque there. So this was sort of the first bigger one that I did. They got up to several hundred people. Those first ones were a little over 100 people. So this was a very rewarding project, and it sits on Ring Road if you've ever been to Elizabethtown. So it sits pretty prominently, where the other two are a little more hidden. So a lot of people seem to have been to this one. So another one that I did in Tennessee is the Islamic Center of Williamson County, Tennessee, which is just south of Nashville. Brentwood and Franklin are the 2 towns that are technically in Williamson County. And I've actually done a lot of work for them. They first considered different properties, and we analyzed different properties. And then we ended up on one in a flood zone, designed the mosque you see in the top photo. Had it mostly approved to go. It was very contentious. There are some people in Tennessee that are not really happy that mosques were going up. So we encountered some resistance at the zoning level. That is something I have experience with as well, beyond just designing buildings. There's a process involved. and there can be challenges associated with that. There actually was a considerable amount of public opposition. That project got abandoned, mostly due to the cost of a turn lane that was being forced on us. And then it evolved and turned into a renovation of an old building, which actually was a scuba center. It had a big, deep pool in it. And that's the building you see at the bottom. So it ended up becoming a renovation project. And they're a very successful mosque, even though it doesn't really look like it on the front. That's a very good community. They have a lot of people that come to their mosque. And the old place where the pool was filled in with concrete and rock, and it's a very large mosque. So even though it doesn't look like it from the front, but it was sort of a testament to sometimes, at least for me in doing this work, it is, I may work for, you can ask my wife, I worked for the same mosque for years and years, and the project evolves and you see them through. Sometimes you have different people from the mosque that you're involved with as you go along. The one in Huntington, West Virginia, I think were 3 different people. And I got to know the last guy so well. When we got done, as luck would have it, he moved to Lexington and he's been part of projects here. But anyway, so you really have to kind of see it through. It's a passion that I have. So another mosque that I did that was built a little more recently, it's been finished for several years, is the Islamic Society of Greater Dayton, which is actually an existing mosque in downtown Dayton, Ohio. But they bought 15 acres out in Bellbrook or Sugar Creek Township, which is a more rural site, and built a larger mosque and a gym and built facilities for their youth and things like that. So this was another mosque under the same name. They keep both facilities. So this was their rural or suburban mosque. And it had 3 or 4 different designs and eventually got, value engineered down to what you see there. In fact, I'm sorry, that's not the best photograph. It's a little bit nicer looking in person now. And the dome canopy is still not there, but they finished it slowly over time. It's kind of like a huge house. They finished the basement later, which is where their multi-purpose hall is. I think I mentioned this whenever I flew back from Amsterdam, that we had several zoning hearings. Some of them, we had hundreds of people there in opposition, and they lasted a while, and we had some surprises along the way. I've got some stories about all of these. I kind of want to go through all the mosques that I've designed, and then I'm going to get to some poignant stories, and I may come back to these whenever I do this. But again, it's a 500-person mosque, a gym, and a community center. Right after the attack on the mosque in New Zealand, people from all over Ohio were seeking for a place to come and meet Muslims and talk to them about what had happened. And they held that huge event in the gym of this mosque. So even though it doesn't look like much, it was a rewarding project and meant a lot to people just beyond Dayton, Ohio, to kind of central Ohio. So I think the governor was there after New Zealand, and a lot of interfaith work was done there as well. So they're a good group of people that I've known for years. It took us about 9 or 10 years from initial sketches, fundraising, zoning, different versions, and then like 4 years in construction, and then 2 later to finish the basement. It was a long process. I've been to Dayton many times. Murfreesboro, Tennessee. This is also south of Nashville. This is probably the most infamous mosque that I've designed because it had by far the most public opposition of any mosque I've ever designed. Ironically, I did not start the project. I was asked to. They originally asked architects to, bid on designing their master plan. And the leaders in that community at that time had an enormous wish list of all of these facilities. Huge mosque, huge multi-purpose room, gym, full-time school, indoor pool, soccer fields, tennis courts, all these things. And they bought 15 acres and it can all physically fit there. So the first architect they hired put it all on a plan, 500 car parking lot, all of that. They had no intentions on building all of that. They got zoning approval, no problem. You can build a church anywhere in the state of Tennessee. They just allow it. So it's just a matter of how. Got it approved, and the neighbors heard about, some of the neighbors that were very opposed to Muslims freaked out, is one way to put it. But they got zoning approval to do it. And then there was a large uproar about that made national news, mostly because the Ground Zero Mosque in New York was happening at the same time, and there was a political race going on that one of the people in the political race decided to comment about the mosque project, And that brought it into the national discussion. It was on CNN and all this sort of stuff. All of this while what was really going on the ground was the mosque realized we never intended to build all of that. We need someone just to design our first building. And that's where I came back into the fold. And they quickly realized that the architect had, I mean, he didn't even face the buildings the right direction. He had never designed a mosque before. And he really just did kind of a rectangular plan of everything to fit on the site. And so the first thing I did is redesign their master plan. And that's the drawing you see at the bottom. And then design their multi-purpose building. It's not actually the mosque. Mosque is phase 3, but the multi-purpose building faces the Qibla, faces the right direction, functions as a mosque. And we just proceeded on. We had zoning approval and went on. It actually went pretty quick. There was sort of a storm cloud above us of these lawsuits and everything that didn't directly affect us. And we went on about that project. But it was a very successful project. They got it done quickly compared to a lot of mosques that drag on. And I have lots of stories about it that I may go into later. So that's the Islamic Center of Murfreesboro, Tennessee. One that I did in Kansas is the Islamic Center of Johnson County, which is in Overland Park. It's on the southwest side of Kansas City, in Kansas. And it was sort of two-phase. We did a grand plan, which you see the top picture, and you see a sort of a three-phase, I'll call it a master plan, in the lower right corner of your screen, of a large design. They were not successful in fundraising for all of that, so we actually scaled the mosque back. And the building they built is where the mosque sits now. And actually, I just went back out there a few weeks ago, and we're looking at doing phase 2, or at least a connector to plan for phase 2. But that's the mosque you see. And I'm sorry, I do not have a better photograph. That was while it was still under construction. Architects are involved during design the most while they weren't under construction. We are involved, but if it's far away from me, I don't go a lot at the end of the project to have a lot of fancy photographs of everything that I've designed. So please bear with me. It is a very large mosque. It's probably one of the largest that I've designed, and it holds 900 people and has 2 stories, and that sort of thing. So a small mosque in Louisville is the Bosnian American Islamic Center. It's on 6 Mile Lane in Louisville. It was my first experience at working for a Bosnian community. The prayers there are in Bosniak in their language, but it is just a Sunni mosque. And it took a long time. I'll just say they're mostly a blue collar community, but a very, very robust and involved community, a very active community, a great community to work for, not super nice people. And over several years, we achieved a smaller mosque. This is about a 300-person facility. It includes a lower level or a basement that has a large multi-purpose room. It replaced an existing little house that they used as a mosque. So we tore that down and built a mosque back in its place. But one thing that I really like about this mosque is they got a local artist that was actually Turkish that did all the calligraphy and all the painting inside. So a lot of times mosques struggle with fundraising. And so they kind of, as I said, they sort of limp across the finish line, and things are usually modestly finished at the end, just enough to get in, and then over time. But this mosque just ran across the finish line. They had furnishings, they had tables, chairs in the office, they had calligraphy on the walls and painting and everything. And it's really a beautiful, smaller building. And in some ways, the smaller buildings are very rewarding because you get to know the people. It's not a huge facility. And for me, it was very impactful and a pleasure to be a part of. Also did another mosque in Tennessee, the Islamic Center of Bellevue, which is adjacent to what they call the international, I forgot the name of the international school. They're like Lexington, they don't put Islamic in their Islamic school name. So it sits right next to the Islamic school. This was sort of a topsy-turvy, challenging project that evolved over time, but has a really nice interior. I'm sorry, I don't have more photographs there, but this is actually in Nashville. Bellevue is a part of Nashville, just to the east side of it. And we're now looking at phase 2, which includes a gym. And the gym, this is used in concert with the Islamic school, even though the mosque is open on Fridays and at other times on weekends for the whole community. The kids use it during the day in the Islamic school. So it's a successful project. All the way up in Minnesota, I think it was because I spoke at one of the national conventions. I got connected with some Muslims up in the Twin Cities. And up in the Twin Cities, I've done several projects, but the only one that's gotten built is the Islamic Society of Woodbury East Metro, which is within the Twin Cities of St. Paul and Minneapolis. It is the farthest east. Woodbury is on the east side of St. Paul, and technically we're in the next city over, which is Athens. So they've now renamed this project the Eastern Twin Cities Islamic Center. And it's the easternmost mosque in Minnesota, but there's a lot of mosques in the Twin Cities. They have a very large Muslim community, very large Somali community. But this particular mosque is inhabited mostly by, I mean, it's a variety of people, but it's mostly Southeast Asians, Indian, Pakistani, and some Arabs that go there. But like Murfreesboro, it is actually a multi-purpose building. The mosque is phase 2. So they moved to this property, can use it as both a prayer space and a place for dinners and banquets. And then as the community continues to grow, they will build an even bigger mosque in front of them that will have a bigger presence. Of course, everyone just refers to it as the mosque. It's used that way now. It's actually a multi-purpose building, only for those of us that design it. But it is a very large piece of property, 30 acres. So we did a very comprehensive dream master plan that is a full-time school, soccer fields with a cricket pitch on it, tennis courts, a field house. There's an existing house because it was a farm that we added, you know, on the plan, more houses around it. So it could be a retirement village or assisted living or whatever they want. And even a little retail component whenever the town grows into them. They're pretty far out, kind of in a rural area. So we're bound by some zoning regulations and things like that. We had a little bit of opposition up there as well. There's always sort of a preamble or a time before these projects where we're going through and doing things and learning lessons and speaking to the public. That is not when projects actually start. It's the first thing we do, but then there's a design and then there's a building and there's a whole process to it. Some of the, I've designed, everyone goes, how many mosques have you designed? Well, here are 2 that I've designed that didn't get built, but have stories with them that are rather interesting. The top one on this slide is the Northwest Islamic Community Center in Plymouth, Minnesota. And if it doesn't look like a mosque, this actually project was to make that building look more like a mosque. It is literally across from City Hall in Plymouth, which is kind of the far west side of Minneapolis. It is right downtown because it is the post office. The post office is there. The post office was both a post office and a distribution center. And at some point, the Postal Service decided to sell off the building and eliminate the distribution center, but keep the post office there. So they sold the building and a mosque bought it. The mosque uses the back 2/3, the old distribution portion, and keeps the post office as a tenant. It is still the post office across from City Hall, but it is also a mosque, and it looks like the post office now. So twice I've been hired to design a renovation to this building to make it look more like what it is, and that is a mosque that has a post office attached to it. And they still haven't built it yet because there's an internal debate about whether or not they should stay in that building or they should build remote, which is an internal debate. But it was a fun project. How do you turn a post office into a mosque? And that was kind of fun. So I also had the pleasure working for a mosque in Houston, Texas, which is about the farthest away I've gotten. We have some family down there, some of which I think might be on the call today. And we had the opportunity to design an expansion of an existing large mosque and Islamic school down there. The 2 lower pictures you see on this slide show the bulk of that work, which is all in the front. And it was to double the size of their existing mosque. I forget, I think it was over 1,000 people total together. A new entrance that looked like what it was, and a large multi-purpose room on the left side of those slides there. That did not get built that way. That project paused for a while, and then they went with someone local to expand their mosque. They actually followed much of this plan to expand the mosque, but they didn't build the multi-purpose hall, likely due to funding. But that was pretty far and remote for me, and I was really only hired to do the schematic and to get, to do the 3D presentation to get the community excited. So that's all I was hired to do. And that mosque is called Sabarin, but it's actually part of the Brand Lane Islamic Center, which is also the Everest Academy. They have several entities all on one property, all Muslim owned. So everyone asked me how many have I designed. Here's some that I've designed that have been built. So that happened. Some current projects, some things that are going on right now. In Carmel, Indiana, which is part of Indianapolis, the northwest side of Indianapolis, a very nice part of Indianapolis, is the Al Salam Foundation's. They're currently in a rented space, and they wanted a new mosque, and they bought 15 acres, a big chunk of which can't be used because there's some gas lines in it, but it's a rural site, and had the pleasure of designing a new mosque for 350 people with a gym. This is done, designed, and about to start construction here, hopefully within a few weeks. But they made some revisions, so we got to get those revisions done, and then we're about ready to start turning dirt. The picture on the bottom is an addition to the Toledo Islamic Academy, which is on the north side of Toledo, Ohio. It is both. Right now, it's actually an old church building. Doesn't really look like a typical church that the mosque bought 20 something years ago, used as a mosque, and they use the existing Sunday school classrooms as a full-time school. Well, the school needed bigger classrooms. The school is growing out of the mosque. So this is a big addition to the existing building, mostly for the school to alleviate pressure on the mosque. And that is under construction now. It's about a $7 million project and has, I don't know, 10 big classrooms. It also includes a large multi-purpose room, like a banquet hall for the community that the mosque will continue to use, because their prayer space is plenty big as it is. And so that's under construction. In fact, I was just there Wednesday. So a lot of trips up and down I-75 to Toledo. I've done some things that are a little unusual. Designing mosques is taking me, I guess, far and wide. I had the pleasure of being approached by, I was approached by a playwright in Chicago to design a fictional mosque for the city of Naperville, which is part of suburban Chicago. And the premise to the play was that a mosque would go through its zoning application, have public opposition, something I've lived through many times as to assist the applicant to assist the mosque. But they needed a fictional project as the backdrop. They needed a project to talk about. And so they picked the old downtown city library, which actually was being used as a church, as a Korean church. And it had the library itself had a terrible modern addition on the side. And the premise was they would rip that off. The mosque would buy the building, build a new mosque to sit in downtown Naperville. So it had this historic relationship to it. And it was also an interfaith center. That was the premise. So the challenge was to design a mosque that, set down in this historic area that has all these parallels and things, that he can derive stories from to serve as a backdrop. But for me as an architect, it was an opportunity to design a building with no real effective client telling me what to do, no budget at all, just design away. So it was a lot of fun. So I did a very modern approach to a mosque design, and they loved it. And then the story goes on. And so the play happened. We got invited, and it was really interesting to sit down in the audience and have actually they didn't end up having an architect in the play. They had the community leaders, the mosque leaders, talk about the architecture, and I also assisted with dialogue and things like that because I've been to many zoning hearings for mosques. They had a conservative radio host, in the play where he was complaining about the mosque and against the Muslims, and they wrote that all into the dialogue, and that was kind of fun to be a part of. The play happened. It ran for a while in Chicago. It was fun. It was a pleasure to be of. But then a few years later, this building, the building on the left in these pictures, exists, and it was under duress from a developer to be torn down. So a local historic preservation group needed to show that this historic building can be saved by adding on something to it. Well, there was a designed example of that. So I took off the crescent moon and I took off the mosque names, and they showed it to the community up there as a way to save this building. And by golly, this building didn't get saved, and the developer had to build all around it and save it. So the local historic group that formed for this purpose used my design to save this historic building. And then it doesn't stop there. After that, they contacted me, I think it was about a year ago. They wanted to save the YMCA next door. And so they had me do a 3D model of it. And they were unsuccessful in saving the YMCA, which closed during COVID. So it's funny how that one little bit of pro bono work for a playwright in Chicago has had half-lives of different things. So this is a fun job. We get involved in a lot of different things as architects. So But the name of that play was called Mosque Alert, and it was primarily about a mosques having opposition during zoning. People coming to the zoning hearing saying, "Oh, you're all terrorists," or this or that or whatever that happens. So that's many of the mosques I've designed. I guess I need to explain why I do this. I mean, obviously, it's in architecture we say it's a deliberate act. I choose to do this. I'm passionate about it. As I mentioned, I used to have experience designing churches, so it was a way to incorporate my faith, for me to learn more about Islam, and meet people outside of kind of our family circles as well. You know, I meet a wide variety of Muslims. So it was personally rewarding to me. I have the opportunity to learn more about Islam from a greater variety of people. And Muslim communities often approach me because I'm Muslim. And I'm kind of a good liaison. I'm also from here. So I don't just speak the construction language. I also speak English as my native language. So I can be a pretty good liaison between Muslim communities and the broader either, you know, American communities they're in, or the zoning boards or the construction industry that they're in. You know, there's a few things that don't always translate well, or people from the mosque may struggle to translate well, and I can help with that. Architecturally, it's also an opportunity. There aren't a lot of mosques that are purpose-built mosques in the United States. So from an architect's perspective, it's an opportunity to get in on a lower level or the ground floor and design a lot of these buildings where there were not any in those communities before. I don't have a, you know, and this is one thing that I want to remind everyone who may not have been to many mosques is mosques are often collections of people from a variety of cultures within them. This is often sometimes lost amongst people who may not be Muslim or of another faith, that there's, you know, there's not really battles, but there's always discussions and differences of cultures within that group. So in a way, it's sort of fun to walk in as the local and say, well, this is the way we do it here. And, you know, you may want a dome from India or an arch from this area or something like that, but we've got to get it built. How do we bring all that together? And so it's very rewarding personally to be a part of those discussions. And yeah, honestly, I just have a huge collection of friends from all over the Midwest because of it. So it's very personally rewarding because of it. These projects do not happen fast. Church work and other religious work doesn't happen fast either. So it's, you know, it's an opportunity to get to know people. A lot of people ask me to compare and contrast them with church work. And while I have designed a lot of churches and I've even done some as McCoy architects. I don't do them all day long, but you know, there are things that are very similar, and that is the codes are similar, they're identical. The zoning conditions, you know, in which a church goes in is the same for a mosque. In fact, I do a lot at the initial zoning level to explain that mosques are just churches for Muslims. In fact, they'll usually call it a Muslim church, which kind of drives me crazy, but I know what they mean, so we move on. And the fundraising is drastically different. I will say that much, because mosques don't typically borrow to build. So mosques are typically, well, we just are institutionally poor compared to churches, because of our faith teaches us to give directly to the needy, you know, that not a lot of money comes into the facility. So fundraising is a whole different animal. What I tell contractors is, well, it's a cash job. You know, we're not borrowing money, but we may not have all the cash to do it. So it takes a different approach, and I won't deny that is a big part of the challenge. Almost everything I design gets value engineered at some point. It's just going to happen. Let's see, where was I on my list? I'm sorry, I'm not really reading from the slides. Again, those basic zoning, occupancy codes, those are all similar to churches. Fundraising is different. Of course, one thing you normally have to explain in a zoning hearing is that in mosques, the large congregational prayer is on Friday, not on Sunday, because they'll often talk, you know, the neighbors will say, oh, we don't want all that traffic on the weekend. I'm like, oh, well, sir, you'll be glad to know that this occurs during the week. Oh, so those kind of things. And it's funny, a lot of times I find I'm not too involved in interfaith group, because I kind of do it as part of my job. Whenever we go to a zoning hearing, we're often informing a lot of people who are of another faith about the basic practices that go in the mosque. There's a lot of misunderstanding out there. There just is. And so I'm able to explain, well, it's not nearly as mystical as you think it is, and stuff like that. And not not all women cover their hair, and those kind of things that come up. So I'm a liaison between both of those communities more often than I sometimes realize. Um, so those are some of the reasons why I do what I do. And I'm going to be taking questions after this. My suspicion is that you all may have questions about some of the things that I've experienced. So some common misunderstandings is that mosques are not funded from overseas groups. At least I've never seen that actually happen, even though we get accused of it all the time, particularly that one in Murfreesboro. The people in Murfreesboro were convinced that Saudi Arabia was coming to plant a flag in the Bible Belt. In fact, evidently that's exactly why the Saudis came here, was because Christianity spreads from Nashville. And I was like, okay, you're wrong on like so many fronts, but okay. And they're not funded from overseas. They're funded the same way churches are, by local people that have come together. Usually it's a few families that contribute big numbers, and then the community gives a lot of smaller numbers. In a few instances, there have been Islamically acceptable loans, but that's very rare. Normally, it's just donations. So again, the fundraising process is quite a bit different. Whereas a church will do fundraising, raise to a certain level, and then be able to seek fundraising and figure that out as part of their calculus, and then build from that all at once. Mosques are still figuring that out as they go along. So we have to approach contractual relationships with builders a little differently, so that we can pay as we go along. Things draw out. Obviously, I would love for every project I design to have all the money assured up front, but in what I do, it takes some finesse and some time and some patience. And again, you're often dealing people within the Muslim communities to have very diverse views. They just do, on money, on how to fund it, when you should start. These things happen. So there's a lot of board meetings, there are a lot of committee meetings that you attend, and you talk through the process over and over again. What a lot of people don't realize is there is a massive need for mosques. Most mosques that I know of are overcrowded. And as soon as you build it, there are people that don't go to mosques that come and attend because it's either close. There's a huge need. There are very few, unless they're in a very rural area or something like that, that build and aren't fully occupied within a few years. Most of them are packed. The one in Minnesota, we tripled their largest daily prayer capacity in the design, and they filled up within a year, and they're now holding 2 services. So I mean, they multiplied their community by 4 or 5 people on Friday prayers because of that, because they simply built the building. There are so many mosques that are in renovated and dilapidated structures that a lot of people don't either feel comfortable. Some women don't feel comfortable. There are a lot of reasons why Muslims may or may not feel comfortable going to this mosque or that. So whenever you build one, it's like a pressure release. Oh, there's space there. Maybe people moving around, we'll go there, even though it's a longer drive or something like that. So most mosques are, it's a real need. There's a real need out there. By far, the biggest challenge is fundraising. There's no doubt about it that the money or lack thereof impacts the entire process. Another difficult area of the projects to get right is the women's prayer area. And it's not that we can't design it one way or another, but within Muslim communities, there are raging debates about how it should be. This mosque is open, women's area is protected, but there's no barrier. There are other mosques that the leaders are adamant that it be a certain way. It'd either be 2 rooms or there be a screen partition. All of those bring code implications, design implications. I have opinions about the matter, but when I'm working with community, I do what they want. It's their mosque, as I tell them over and over again. But I've had mosques that we have designed the women's area to be a specific way for specific reasons. I've presented it to their community 10 times. We've been under construction for 3 years. And at the last minute, we need to put a barrier up. And it's like, where did all of those people that were so passionate about it being open go? And sure enough, there's a partial barrier there now, and those sort of things happen. So it is a raging debate and a challenge to get done consistently. I won't say right or wrong. I'm not trying to take a stand about how it should be, but it is a challenge. Restroom practices, because Muslims wash their hands and their feet before prayer in a prescribed way. In fact, you're welcome to visit Our wudu facilities, our ablution facilities here, they're, plumbing inspectors do not understand. The plumber does not understand what they're building. In fact, that's probably one of the areas that I had the most fun in community outreach is talking to, I hate to say it, the redneck plumber who has no idea why he's doing a mosque, but he's trying to plumb up a wudu facility for hand and foot washing, and he has no idea what he's doing. And he rolls up on his Harley Davidson or whatever, and what am I doing? And I get to talk to that guy and explain it to that guy, and that's fun. That's fun. My father was a dump truck driver. I have friends that are not unlike that, and calm down. This is all we're doing here. Oh, okay, I get it. And then sometimes they'll come back and say, well, what we should do then is this. Shouldn't this be a little lower or something like that? By the way, that's a hard part to get right as well, because Muslims have strong opinions about that distance and where the splash is, and is the water going to splash on you? I don't know how many times I've designed it a certain way and it always gets built slightly different. It just happens. So restroom practices are a bit of a challenge. I think I mentioned this before. A lot of people who are not Muslim or another faith do not fully appreciate the differences going on within the mosque. They've heard a story on TV, or they've met a Muslim from Saudi Arabia, and they assume that means the same thing to an African American convert who accepted Islam in prison. It does not. It is drastically different. And those kind of things are playing out inside our mosques, and that's why people of other faiths or at zoning hearings that are there get frustrated, because you're telling me two different things. Well, they are two different things. Mosques are much less denominational. There's really only two major sects of Islam, and most of them are all Sunni mosques. So religiously, we're not that divided. Culturally, we have lots of divisions internally, and they're not really divisions in the way that a lot of people may think they are. They're more like challenges. Almost every mosque I know of that may be populated by one ethnic group or another says they're open, and they mean it. They mean it. But getting through that, designing facilities and accommodating everybody is part of the challenge. I will just say that Muslim groups, on average, do not understand how much it costs to build a building. One of my primary roles is to walk in there and be the bad cop and explain that construction is expensive. It's very expensive now. I always get projects related to the cost of their house versus building a mosque. And it's like those are two apples, oranges, totally different things. They're significantly different. And so there's always a shock. There's always a challenge when it comes to money. In some instances, Muslims will defer or cater to specific leaders or donors, like, oh, this family gave a lot of money to this project, we should defer to them. It's actually a sign of respect, but it can kind of drive other people within the community a little bit crazy, or it can drive us as designers crazy. Why are we making it that way for that one person when the broader community cares about this? So we have to work through those kind of issues. That happens. And it's understandable. It's not sinister or anything like that. In many instances, and I think this is because many Muslims are immigrants, many Muslims can be fearful or intimidated by particularly the public side of the construction process, a zoning hearing. They often misunderstand what the approval means. They don't understand why it has to go to a public process, and they're very hesitant to lay all their cards out on the table at a public zoning hearing for fear of being attacked. And then they get accused of holding back and being secretive and that sort of stuff. So it kind of eggs each other on. And so there are challenges in that process. And like the mosque in Tennessee that showed their entire dream on the zoning plan with no intention to build all that. Had the neighbors who had opposed that project realized that they only intended to build a small facility in the beginning, if that had been the only thing on the plan, I bet 90% of that had gone away. They would have still had an issue with Muslims being there, but that was an existing mosque that was in the community that was just moving. That's all that was happening. But they perceived it as this large group coming into Tennessee to take over. And the Muslim community had no intentions to build that. That was a mistake on the plan. I can say that because I didn't do that first. But they should have shown phases, or should have taken some of that other stuff off. They were never going to build an indoor pool. We in the Muslim community know that's a pipe dream. We'll eventually get there one day where we can afford those kind of facilities. That's not going to happen anytime soon. That was definitely a later phase. that could have been left off and been less scary to some people. So, but Muslims can be very suspicious of the overall process. Sometimes there can be a focus on materialism. I lost my mic. That better? Where's my microphone? Did it slide back? Excuse me. For those of you at home, I apologize if I disappeared there for a while. Addison, does it sound better? Thank you. A lot of times we will focus on, and this is kind of my own criticism of the Muslim communities, we will focus on the chandelier. We will focus on the dome. We will focus on minarets that don't broadcast the call to prayer. We focus on materialistic things. There's always a subset of people within the Muslim groups. We just need a big room. We just need to be clean and safe, and we don't need to focus. We don't need to be spending money on those things. So there's always kind of that raging debate within the process that goes on as well. Muslim leaders will mislead the designers deliberately. Very first mosque I designed, we had a men's and a women's restroom, a hallway, and the prayer space. That was it, all on one level. Then we had a basement that had a multi-purpose room. And I went, and the client was a family friend. So every time we went, my wife and I went during design meetings and stuff. And we went together and had a great time, got to know the family well, loved the family. Some of their family are in the room today. And when they were under construction, I went down there once, and it was the one of the few times I went without my wife. And I'm like, where's the bathroom for men? They didn't build the bathroom for men. Whoa, Mr. Contractor, you like missed a huge, there's only 4 rooms upstairs and you missed one of them. Oh no. And then they explained to me, no, we're going to build, the men are going to use what you call the women's restroom, and the women are going to pray downstairs. We just didn't want to tell you because your wife was always with you. I'm like, oh my gosh. Now I have a code problem because the lower level was not handicap accessible. Whereas the upper level was. And it's like, now I have a problem. I don't have a problem with there being said. I don't want to take issue with where women pray in there. It's not my mosque, but good lesson learned right there off the bat is we need to say the whole truth. And it's funny, a lot of Muslims may approach a project, they say, how big of a building can I have for my budget? And I'll tell you how many people I can put in there. It's like, oh, no, it doesn't work that way. I need to know how many people you want to accommodate. And then I'll tell you how big the building will be and how much it might cost. And there's always this sort of difference of approach. Oh, well, you'll build that big room, but we'll also pray over there. It's like, well, that's not rated for it. You know, the exits, the fire exits, and all the code things are not that. I need to do what you need to be clear about what you want. And then you'll get the leaders to pin down, what they want. And then the community will get involved and they'll, of course, change it. They will, of course, change it. So there's a project under construction right now, and they have deliberately made aspects of it not handicap accessible because they want it that way. And I think they're going to get flagged for it whenever the inspector comes through. But there's challenges. When you work for religious communities, you're working for a broader community, you're working for a committee. This is part of the job. And it's not unique to mosques either, but I have more experience on this side, so that's something that I experience. So Muslims will mislead the designer, particularly in issues of use, segregation, or funding. They will tell me how much they think they can fundraise for, and they can't. So we've designed too big of a building. And that happens all the time. So there is often a disconnect between people who may have immigrated here versus who have grown up here. I had one Muslim leader that's like, well, we'll hold our views and what we intend to do private and not tell them until after we get approval. It's like, no, you have to explain how you're going to use it to get approval. And why do we have to say that? We want to tell them later after we get approval from the authorities. Like, you're not in Syria, sir. It doesn't, we're in the permission asking business here. We're not looking for forgiveness later. And then sometimes mosques fail to see the long-term vision of what they're doing. They either underestimate the size of the community that's going to happen. I'm almost positive that mosque in Indiana that we're designing only has 350 people. I can guarantee you it's going to be packed on day one. There are too many Muslims in Indianapolis that are going to go to that whenever it opens. I just think we're building it too small, but it's for the budget. So Those are challenges and lessons learned.
All righty. Well, you have given quite a comprehensive look at mosque design, and I think you've answered the question already, Chris. What does the typical mosque look like? Because
Uh,
there is no typical look,
there
is
is no
there?
typical. I don't want there to be a typical. I like the variety that architecture brings unto itself. So I think a mosque should belong where it is and be a reflection of the people that it serves.
So many of the photographs and the depictions you shared have been stunningly beautiful. In fact, that was
Thank you.
a comment from one of our participants, Zarina, who said absolutely beautiful. So do you also look at yourself as an artist, an architect? Does every architect have to have artistic skills?
Yes, of course. So architecture grew out of a combination of art and engineering. The University of Kentucky that my wife and I attended at the time that we attended was very much taught as an art school first in your first few years, and then you learn more technical matters later. And it is fundamentally more of, it slants more towards the art side. At least it did when we were there. I cannot attest to what it is now, but I think it is still that way. Absolutely, there are my I have a nephew that is in architecture school, just finished up, and his father is looking at me and saying, yes, it's still an art school. So yes, it is. But you're taught those things. I think one of the reasons I went into it is because I like to draw. My father could draw. My sister is an artist as well. All of us have some level of creativity in our family. So for me, it was a logical extension. Actually, I have a slide of a hand-drawn sketch up there, which was for the Islamic School of Louisville that didn't get built. But I like to draw. So it is very much a creative endeavor, and art goes with it. Architecture is a broader art. It's not like a painting. It has to also be shelter and be a building and those sort of things, but it is certainly part of it. For me, I just see way too much repetition in which there was greater variety in the buildings, but hopefully you all don't see it that way. I look at these things all day long. So I'm trying to challenge myself to, change the mold each time and that sort of things, but you fall into routines as well. And then the communities always bring a certain and different desire. It is a lot of times people will ask me like, oh, can we make a certain pointed arch this way or this that way? It's actually rather rare that a mosque express a particular style and ask me to meet that. It's much more about what can we do for our money, and then they'll react to what I do as to whether or not it looks good or not. So it's sort of that way, but obviously when we did the Bosnian mosque, we needed it to respect the Bosnian culture. So aspects of the minaret or something like that looks more like a Bosnian mosque to them, but the overall building is what it is. So sorry, Ron, I just kept on talking. Go ahead.
You're getting information that our people want to hear.
Okay.
A couple of times you mentioned public opposition, and I think especially in Tennessee.
Yes.
And one of our participants, Elizabeth, well, you kind of explained the cause of opposition, but more to her point, she said, what did you learn is the best way to overcome the opposition?
Well, the best way to get through that is to realize that first and foremost, it is not personal. Public hearings are basically open mic night. You're going to have people say all sorts of things. It's just going to happen. I typically strive to prepare the Muslim leaders that come with me to these things to think about what they're hearing before they react. Our job at those hearings is to get the design through the process and to get it built. It is no longer an interfaith session. We do not need to defend the religion that night. We just need to think about what matters to the course of our project. Zoning officials, board members that sit up there are used to open mic. People say all kinds of crazy things. You just need to first and foremost, you need to let the crazy stuff go away and then recognize what sticks. So I kind of put a bit of a lawyer hat on and think, is it relevant? Is it going to matter to those people who are judging us? Most of the time, the work is done in advance. If you have no reason to deny you, they're not going to. The mosque in Huntington, West Virginia lasted 4 or 5 hours. The hearing did, just on our case alone. People paraded all day long up there against it. And the Muslim community felt compelled to speak at every one of those. Oh no, we're not that way. We don't treat our women this way. Stop it. Just let it. The zoning board doesn't care about that. And they were just scared to death that it was not going to approve. I said, nothing has been said that is going to stick to us. You know, they haven't said anything about traffic. They haven't said anything about separation. We were in an urban area. You know, we didn't have any reason to deny us. And there was one guy that was a zoning board official that was clearly a bigot. You could just tell he had a problem. And it was 5-1. He was the one negative, and he had no reason, no justification that mattered to zoning or anything like that. So you just move on. So what I've learned to do is move on and wear thick skin and don't sweat the little stuff. Just move on. And then we can all go out to dinner afterwards and talk about it and talk about that crazy person saying things about Muslims that he heard off of some news site or something. It happens. The one in Carmel was particularly interesting because we did have a lot of opposition. The zoning hearing lasted 6 hours. We had like 1,200 people, by far their largest zoning case ever of all time. And the vast majority of people opposed to us were Asian. And I do not know why. I do not know why there were so many Asian immigrants there against us. And they had absolutely no reason. They just said it was a bad plan. You should not approve this bad plan. And you got to give, even if you want the zoning board to reject us, you got to give them a reason, you know, otherwise they're there to approve us. The real key is to stay to the facts of what's happening. Don't ask for exceptions. This is what I advise the Muslim community. Don't try to make exceptions to the rules. Follow the rules. They have no reason to deny you, even if the public is against you. But many of them go smoothly. You don't hear about those. I did not design the building we're in today, but I did do the zoning application for it, and it went fine. It was actually held Friday at 1, and I made it to the end of Friday prayers. It went so fast. So it was really hilarious. They were saying, "Oh, Brother Chris is not with us today because he's downtown getting our zoning permission." And they look out in the crowd, and there I was. And I'm like, "We got it." And it was no problem. So many of them go just fine. But some of them are quite memorable. Ron, go ahead. You were saying something.
So a successful mosque architect has to be artistic, an engineer, a lawyer, and a diplomat.
Some of those things. I'm not any of those things. I'm just an architect, but we have to draw upon some of those. So those aspects, sure. Any good generalist will try to draw upon the things they've learned from other fields. Yes. So.
Now, one of our attendees is asking a good point for those, especially non-Muslims, to explain, if you will, some of the structures typical to a mosque, the dome, the minarets, the arches above windows and doors. Can you do that?
Sure. So the dome is very important to Muslims. It is not inherently Islamic. Historically, if of course Christianity came before Islam, there were, I learned this in architecture school, there were sort of two schools of thought in early churches. There was the basilica style, or the straight nave style, that is more on the western side of Christianity when it was developing. And then on the eastern half, it was a dome style of architecture. Any of you all have been to Turkey? Any of you have been to the Middle East? Anybody seen old churches? Hagia Sophia is a good example of the style of domed architecture that area became absorbed by Muslims, or became predominantly Muslim. So those were the large spaces. So that was the style of building a large religious building. So it kind of domes rolled into that. And so therefore you see it adopted or co-opted by Muslims to become part of their architectural styles. The minaret functionally is, the dome also, I should say that to many Muslims, it is interpreted as being somewhat emblematic of the oneness of Allah, or oneness of God. And there aren't a lot of domes in American culture here that you see too often on religious structures. So a lot of Muslims in the United States want a dome on their mosque so that it looks like a mosque. If there's one thing that you ask many Muslims, What makes it look like a mosque? Oh, it's got a dome, right? It's got to have a dome. So that's the first thing that people will ask for, and usually the first thing we strive for. And there's different iterations of domes. A minaret is something that is commonly requested. A minaret is fundamentally a high place to announce the call to prayer or azan. That's all it functionally is a place for someone to go up and say that. But it's become a symbol, very much a symbol or an icon of a mosque. A lot of mosques have multiples of them. And so and of all the ones that I've designed, they are entirely ornamental. There's never a speaker up there. They're just there for the sake of making it look like what it is. And I enjoy designing them, or as I like to say, it is a beautiful waste of money. Because there's nothing functional about it other than its appearance. So I enjoy designing them, but there's no real functional value in a modern mosque in the United States, or as what I've said at one zoning hearing, well, no, there won't be speakers up there. There's an app for that because you can get the call to prayer on your phone. And they're like, wait, what did he just say? Did he say there's an app for that? So, that was kind of fun. It kind of made that person stop talking too. So, yeah, you kind of have to swat some people down sometimes, but it happens. And so a minaret is something that's commonly requested. And then along with the dome, pointed arches, arched windows, there's a great variety here of requests and desires for things, but that comes from it looking more ornate or more religious in nature. And a lot of mosques have at least a big arch when you come through, when you come in. So there's usually a desire to have arches somewhere, if not at the main entrance or around the windows or something like that. That is a little more loose in its requests and subject to interpretation. But the flip side to all of this is everything I just named usually has curves on it. Anything in construction that's curves costs dramatically more, and we're fighting a budget. So we're selective about where those elements go and strategic. A funny anecdote is that when I started designing mosques, right as I left the firm that I was at, or the company that I was at, I had been doing a large agricultural project, and it had silos, and there's a dome on silos, and we had to work with the supplier of the silo dome manufacturer. And I quickly learned, oh, there's companies out there that just make domes very affordably for and they make architectural grades. Sometimes the one in the Bosnian Mosque in Louisville, it actually has 3 domes, and there's an outer shell and an inner shell to make it waterproof, and then an inner frame for the drywall. But all of those products came from a silo manufacturer, domes, and it was fairly affordable. It's the biggest cost in a dome is not so much the dome itself, but all the structure it is there to hold it up and to protect it from wind. So those, Ron, to get back to the question, those are sort of the most common requests. Was the question also related to what's in a mosque like in terms of rooms? Or
Well,
is it
not
just about architectural elements?
well, the exterior, but also the place within the mosque. And you had a couple of photographs showing the place where the imam leads the prayer. Now, does that have to be specially designed also?
Yes. So the key elements, let me see if I can, there's the prayer space, or what I refer to as the musalla, or most Muslims refer to as the musalla, is usually one area. I always conceive of it as one area for all Muslims. It may be divided between men and women to a degree to which the community decides, or it could be 2 rooms. If it's a renovation, it might be 2 rooms for other reasons. So that is obviously the main space. And all Muslims really need is a clean, carpeted area that faces Mecca, or the angle in North America is roughly 51 degrees to the northeast, which is a spherical reference. In front of that, one person needs to step out to pray, and that is called the mihrab. For those of you in the room, that's the front area that you see the arches for. There, it can take a variety of arrangements. It is usually an arched niche. Functionally, it is a place for one person to step out in front of everyone and lead the prayer. That's it. Obviously, on Fridays, there is a sermon or khutbah that is given, and that is traditionally done to the right of the place of where someone prays and is elevated. So usually a few steps up to the right, you see a mimbar, which is what that's called. So within the prayer space, or within the musalla, you have the mihrab, which is that whole front altar area. And then there's a mimbar, which is effectively a pulpit. Sometimes there can be a place to the left that there's just a little simple podium, or since I was the son of a piano teacher and choir director, a music stand. just so that if someone doesn't, like if a speaker feels so inclined to speak but doesn't want to stand at the minbar, they can stand to that sometimes. So that's the key elements within the mosque space itself. Within Islamic centers, there are, of course, as an entry or lobby, there's restrooms, there are ablution or wudu facilities to wash your hands and feet, which are associated with the restrooms, and then the all-important shoe racks, which I was told by a friend of mine are basically the toll booths of the mosque. You got to come in. Whether or not you need to wash your hands and feet or go to the restroom is up to you, but you've got to take off your shoes and then proceed into it. So there's this progression into the prayer space. Other things that accompany Islamic centers are a multi-purpose room for banquets, classrooms for either Sunday school or weekend schools, or perhaps a full-time school. Usually there's a desire to have a gym, whether it's combined with the multi-purpose room or not. A place for recreational facilities for the kids. Those are the key elements that are usually considered. In proper master planning, we keep those main spaces oriented towards the prayer direction, or Qibla as it's called. The angle to which Muslims pray is called the Qibla. And we keep those oriented just in case there is spillover. Say the musalla or the mosque space fills up. Well, some people can pray in the multi-purpose space as well. So if that's facing or has its orientation known, then people can overflow to that, if that makes sense. So those are sort of the key elements within a mosque, or words that I use interchangeably all the time. I should tell you that I will use the word mosque and masjid interchangeably. They mean the same word. They mean the same thing. And if there's one area I'm bilingual, it's that word. I will say it interchangeably, masjid and mosque. So Ron, you think I answered that question okay?
I think you did. Now, you mentioned multi-purpose room. Does that usually include kitchen facilities and places for people to sit and dine?
Obviously, a multi-purpose room, I've seen churches call it the fellowship hall, where dinners, banquets, events, conferences go on. Almost always has some sort of kitchen or catering kitchen or warming kitchen or a full-blown kitchen to serve meals and dinners and things like that. During Ramadan, there's always dinners and banquets within a mosque on the weekends or whenever. There's always events that occur, but during Ramadan is a particularly busy time in the mosque. More people come, particularly in the evenings. And because you're fasting all day, there's obviously a desire to gather for food. After the evening prayer, when the sun sets, and before the later evening prayer or Isha, that's when it's time to eat. So a lot of times the design of these multipurpose spaces is thought very stringently about how it can function during Ramadan for iftars, and how that is. And that's usually buffet style. And so, they're usually catered. So even if we have a full kitchen, it's designed for catering for big events. And that is usually the time that it is used the most. The multipurpose spaces are. And then, there can be presentations like this. There can be conferences that use multipurpose rooms. Sometimes multipurpose rooms will have dividers in them so that they can function as Sunday school classrooms. Those are things that kind of happen. And that's a lot like churches. Churches do the same thing with their fellowship halls. I'm going to restate the question for everyone else. Is there a scriptural reason why the prayer space is made a certain way? It is mostly functional. It is prescribed that you have a clean, and Ron, correct me if I say this wrong, that you have a clean place to pray. It's not required that it be carpeted, but that, because we never wear our shoes in here, this is just automatically a prayer rug that way, that it be clean and that it face Mecca, it face the Kaaba in Mecca. And that is a unique angle that is not always obvious. You have to think about it spherically. And then there be a place for someone to step out in front and lead. That is the only, I don't even know where it says that in the Quran. Ron, can you answer that?
Afraid I can't help you, Chris.
It's funny. We have a book of what's called architectural standards, and they have one page on mosques, and that's about all it says, is that you have a rectangular space. Well, the forming of rows, you are encouraged to pray shoulder to shoulder with your fellow man or woman. And so we need to form in rows that do that. So, and Ron, we have another question from the fields. You're not alone. The gentleman is expressing a concern about the segregation between men and women in a mosque. Well, so the separation between men and women is a debate both outside and within mosques themselves. And there are many facets that I cannot answer today. So there's a debate for those of you on Zoom. There's some discussion here in the room about that. And if I could reiterate what she said a little bit, Muslims are encouraged to be modest, both in clothing, and it tends to manifest itself culturally more about what women wear and what women do. And I'm not going to debate that for you because I personally probably agree more with you than you realize. But because you bend over in prayer, and there's no, typically, at least not in here, there's no barrier between men and women. There is a real need for modesty in that. And so therefore women, that's the way it's been explained to me, that women pray behind the men because it is more modest. We can debate that, but I can't always defend it. But you would be not typically, but you would be surprised. There are times there's a lot of diversity within the Muslim. I've been to a fundraiser for Muslims, for a Muslim community, and there were women in cocktail dresses that you would be shocked to see, that comes with her mother who is wearing full hijab. So don't underestimate the diversity going on within our Muslim communities because it's there. It just may not be obvious. Obviously, the woman that wears hijab, it stands out much more than the women who do not. So it becomes a lightning rod for those discussions. And I honestly try not to get overarching into the debate of that because it gets a little bit beyond my pay grade. But as an architect, I will tell you that community separation is hotly debated. I'm going to restate stuff for the people on Zoom as you say it. Sister is saying that the whole earth is considered, in a hadith, the whole earth is considered a mosque or a masjid. You have to pray in a clean space where there's nothing like blood or urine or filth and those kind of things. It could be dusty, yes. It's a different concept of clean. The sister, I'm going to restate for the people on Zoom that we can pray. I mean, we can pray on a concrete slab as long as we're in our shoes, as long as it's clean. And that's why we sometimes pray in a park. And then you mentioned somewhere else, or just in a big building or warehouse, except for the bathroom, because that is unclean. Yes, you can, wherever you can clean yourself, you can pray. So yes, that's a good point. The only reason, and I want to repeat this for the people at home, the only reason we take our shoes off here is because this mosque chooses to keep this carpet clean as if it's one prayer rug. It's more about what we're tracking in. We don't think anyone's shoes are specifically dirty. It's just, it's policy. So yes, in the first mosques, the time of the Prophet, men and women used the same door and they used the same space. And the only division was that women were behind the men, or men were in front of the women. Yes, and a lot of the segregation, this has been my experience, does not really come, and this goes back to your comment, it doesn't actually come from scripture or in the Quran, but a lot of Muslim cultures were already culturally segregated when Islam was accepted there. So it's perceived as religion, but much of it is cultural. And if there's one thing that I've learned is to distinguish the difference between what's actually religious and what is culturally interpreted. Not saying anything's right or wrong.
One of our online people is noting that historically speaking, among the Jewish community, Christian community, there's also been segregation of men and women in their facilities. So just for the historical record. So,
yes. Oh, yes.
So now take another one from in person there, Chris, and I've got a couple of more chat comments after that.
Question is, how many architecture schools have professors that teach classes about Islamic architecture? I know of none. I learned all of this. Well, I mean, architecture isn't really taught that way that I'm aware of. It's taught more about teaching the architect to face whatever clients that they come towards. So you learn about architecture, not specifically about cultures and things like that. And architecture is very much an apprenticeship profession that you have to work a period of time before you become a professional architect. And that's when you go out there and get those things. And I don't forget that in the beginning of this, I showed all the other things that I designed too. I had to learn about those as well. So you're expected as a young architect to learn that portion of it. And I had the pleasure of working for architects that did a lot of religious work. And they were very good Catholics, and they did a lot of they did Protestant work too. But it was a good role model for me personally. Architecture schools do show religious structures in their instruction. Absolutely. I'm going to try to summarize a little bit what two people just said in the crowd. The question was, are there classes in architecture schools that teach this sort of stuff? And the general answer is no, that it's religious structures are taught as part of a larger curriculum. There's not even a focus in architecture schools on churches per se. So I think that is a follow-up to that question. Ron, I think we've exhausted all the hands in the audience. Do you want to skip back to a question from someone on Zoom?
Sure. And one is certainly timely. He's talking about security. Do you in your designing stage talk to people about security as,
yes,
I guess, as an architectural element?
Security is becoming an increasing concern, as it is with everyone. I can tell you I've had one mosque in particular strive to have more exit doors, not for fire exits, but for the risk of an active shooter situation. I've had mosques desire to put anti-graffiti coatings on their buildings. It's something I recommend on most religious structures, so that the graffiti can be easily cleaned off, or bacon that gets thrown at the building. That happens too. I have the mosque in Indiana that I designed for you. While we were designing it, there was a mosque in downtown Indiana that got randomly shot at. So now we have bullet resistant glazing in the lower portions of the mosque area itself, which is the part that faces the street. The Islamic school in Toledo that's under construction now has about 30 cameras going up all across it. And we have just like other elementary schools, we have a double locks door entry situation to control visitors. The particular challenge in Toledo is that it's combined with a very large mosque, and on Friday wants to just open its doors. Mosques in general on Friday afternoon are fundamentally open to the public. So it's not so much about keeping people out, it's about giving people the tools they need should they end up in a situation like that, or protecting the building from damage. And in Toledo, in the Islamic school, it's a trick because it's an elementary school where you want all the protections you might imagine for an elementary school these days, combined with something that just opens its doors on Friday. So that was one of the most challenging aspects of that job, was to get it functionally right. So security is definitely a concern. Ron, some hands went up while we were talking about that, so I'm going to address some hands that may be related to this question.
Well, one more follow-up to what you just said. How much does the addition of these security elements add to the cost? It must be very costly.
I've never specifically identified it that way. I actually don't know. So the graffiti coating isn't much. The security camera costs what they cost. The design of additional doors adds several $1,000s, but it's usually not a huge number. And it's usually something that is not debated as to whether or not it's worthwhile to do. It's just done.
So in all of your design work, then, do you suggest these security elements be added?
Yes, and they usually come up automatically. They're part of a larger discussion about access controls and things that come up as the course of architecture. Where do you want security cameras? Do you want them? Do you want to do them later? They'll come up as part of an audio video package. You know, what kind of PA system, and do you want it to be tied into things? These things come up. The door hardware and the access controls of how people come in and out of doors is thought about during design and discussed during design, and then changed while it's under construction because new players come on board and things that we all didn't think of happens. Just like church work, you might imagine, once it actually starts to go up, there's suddenly a whole big bunch of critics that bring up new things that no one ever mentioned during design. And so construction design, I don't design a building, put out the plans, and then it's just built that way. It doesn't happen like that. It's a constant evolution and change. In fact, the doors to the Lexington Universal Academy, the local Islamic school, the door hardware changed this week, and they're a few weeks away from being open. So it's in a constant state of evolution. Muslims that are disabled are accommodated. In that a lot of Muslims that are disabled may not come to the mosque. That just happens. But these chairs you're sitting in today are usually sitting out at the ends in the ladies area. They're across the back, and there's always a group in this mosque. There's a group of chairs for the men. If you can certainly pray in a chair or in a wheelchair right beside your brothers and sisters in a mosque. I've had Muslim leaders tell me, well, we don't have handicapped people in our facilities. I'm like, yes, you do. And we're going to design for it anyway. And so architects as a profession are advocates for those. I mean, it's part of code, but we're also advocates for the disabled. So you better believe that there's accommodations for the disabled. It's a little bit more of a modern construct, but I've designed like the washrooms for your hands and feet that are custom designed. Even in this building, I've done them where one of them leaves the stool out so that a wheelchair can pull up and do it. So they're absolutely considered. It's a challenge sometimes because there are so few disabled Muslims that come to the mosque. But it's absolutely part of modern design practice. Actually, if the designer's done their job right, the people with disabilities are literally mixed into the crowd. That is actually the goal of accessibility requirements and building codes, is that you don't treat people with disabilities differently than you treat everyone else. So we don't the main restrooms are here, but the handicap one's in an outhouse. So that doesn't happen. They're mixed in. So I'm actually relieved to hear you say you don't see it. Hopefully they're there and you're just not noticing them, because that's the goal of universal or accessible design. But actually what's funny is mosques are fundamentally open spaces too. We don't have pews. We don't have fixed seats. So from a designer's perspective, a mosque can be pretty easy to design for the disabled. I've done designs where fold down chairs come out of the walls and stuff like that. They always get value engineered out, but there's usually a collection of chairs along the perimeter. You can see stacks of them over there and over in the corners. And usually we'll design cabinets in to hold chairs because some people need assistance. Both male and female need assistance. And yes, we try to, but a lot of mosques, I don't know if you heard me say earlier, a lot of mosques in the United States are renovated structures. So it's a challenge. And a lot of mosques don't ask for permission to exist. They'll just, it was a store, then I can have it as a mosque and I go in and occupy it. And you ask, where's their certificate of occupancy? How many can they hold? And they're like, you're speaking Greek to them. What do you mean? It was a restaurant before. I can definitely use it as a mosque. We've got a lot more bodies in here. Where are the exits? And those sort of things. So, but that's just architecture. That's not specifically Islamic. It's just in the context of people with disabilities. Is there a prescription, or is there scripture that talks about it, providing for them? That's an important point to remember, that Muslims are not required to pray in the mosque. You're expected to pray 5 times a day. It's a blessing. It's a benefit to pray in groups. It is a particular blessing or benefit to pray Fridays together. That is our weekly congregational prayer. Just like Christians are encouraged to pray in the evenings, to pray at their meals, but come together Sunday morning. There's differences there for sure, but it's not as drastic as you might think. So that's there. And Ron, we have more questions from the audience, or more comments, so go ahead. We ever have a good discussion here. So. I cannot get this screen to share. So for those of you in the room, you're seeing a video animation of one of the mosques that I designed. It's hard to put video in PowerPoint presentations, but since we're just sitting here and there's nothing on the screen, I'm going to put that on. Ron, can you see the video animation on your screen? Ron, you still there?
Yes, I can see it.
Oh, you can. Okay. I couldn't tell on my screen if you could see that or not. So we're just going to let that play while we keep talking. But this video animation, the reason I pulled it up, first of all, it's one of the ones that looks a little nicer, but it does go inside the prayer space, which is, I don't always animate. So it's going to go around the outside and then it'll come inside. But it's not functionally, it's not too drastically different than the room that you're in now. Hopefully it looks a little nicer. But anyway, do we have any? Yes, we have other questions. Early churches in the East, which was probably the domed architecture that I was referring to, didn't have pews anyway. Yeah, good to know. I didn't know that. That's interesting. So, the large cathedrals in Europe, they stood. People stood, and Catholics bend down to pray, kneel. Yes, they do, but they usually have a pew between men and women. So, well, or between the person in front of you, so you're not staring right at them whenever you bend over, when they bend over. But we had a question in the back from someone who hasn't spoken yet, so I'm going to let them. That's a good question. So the question is, because Muslims pray on their weekly congregational prayer is Friday, whereas Christians typically pray Sunday morning, could they coexist or in some way in one facility? They actually do. A lot of mosques get invited to use Christian facilities. I know there was one in Memphis. There's examples of this all over. There's even an example in a TV show called Little Mosque on the Prairie. Where this happens all the time. Because that is usually a result of an existing facility being used in a variety of ways. It's rarely something that they come to an architect and ask to do. Although I will say that in mosques that I design, there is often a desire to be able to accommodate people who may have come to observe prayer, but not to actually coexist use. Usually a purpose-built mosque facility is a community that's growing out of something else or has been using or sharing or cohabitating with something else and wants to have their own. So I'm not personally aware of that, but I know that it happens, that mosques and churches get together and share facilities. Absolutely. There's certainly no reason why they couldn't. In fact, there's all kinds of benefits for them being together. I'm sure there are times when people from each of those groups may object to that and want to have, probably from a desire to have their own facility. But as an architect, I'm not too directly involved in that. I'm sure maybe others in the community could attest to who coexists and who doesn't. But I know there was a big one in Memphis. A lot of times when, at least because I'm listening from the mosque perspective, like in a mosque in Joplin, Missouri got wiped out by the tornado, and they cohabitated with the church until they were able to build another one. Evidently, that went pretty well. I know there's some in Minnesota, too, that I visited. In fact, a lot of mosques are old churches. So I know I've designed several that either replace it, evolve it, or add on to it. So that's not a stretch at all.
Chris, I think we're about ready to wrap up. So
we are getting close to noon, and we did have a hard stop at noon.
So let me just mention, and you noted that there is a burgeoning Muslim population in the United States. Some of your mosques that you've designed are filled from day one when they open. So it bodes well for your career and your company. You're set for a long time, aren't you?
I'm not bored, that's for sure. I've gotten so many calls this spring ever since the pandemic has kind of opened up. A lot of mosques and a lot of churches hibernated a bit as the Christian Muslim dialogue hibernated during. Everybody's coming out to play now, and people are starting to think about projects, and my phone has been ringing off the hook. I cannot get to them all. That is for sure. In fact, I have friends, other architects that are not Muslim, that are getting approached, and I'm desperately trying to help them and share my expertise with them to serve the communities that we serve. In fact, it's a lot of fun to help architects that perhaps are not Muslim. From my perspective, it's a lot of fun. So to help another architect do it, I enjoy watching from the sidelines because I'm usually in the thick of it and in the middle all the time. So this is a bit of a niche. It may seem niche to me, but it's huge. There's a huge need for mosques for sure, and churches sometimes are in decline. So it's weird.
Well, Chris, let me offer my thanks and for all the participants to join in for a terrific presentation, informative, interesting, colorful, artistic, all that. And we'll wrap things up.